Today I'm going to show you how to paint an open forge cut stone tile. We're going to do a sandstone style on this. We're going to start with tiles that have already been primed. You're going to want to get black primer on them. You're going to want to make sure that the primer gets into all the crevices. You don't want any of the shadow to be reflecting back at you. The filament that you're printing with is reflective. So once you have that, we're going to go through a couple different paint colors to bring out the sandstone tile. So for the first coat, we're going to use raw umber. For this coat, I like to use a bigger paint brush. I've got a little bit of a chisel tip here so that I can get a lot of coverage. So the paintbrush wet. We're looking for deep coverage on this because this is going to be the shadows. We're painting right on top of the primer. You can print in black. You're still going to want to prime because you'll end up with shiny bits inside the crevices, which does not look particularly good for shadows. So get this in all the nooks and crannies, because this will be the darkest color you see. I suggest doing 2 coats with this as well. You get paint in the holes, just try and work it out. You can also use a pin after it dries. When this dries, this is going to be much darker. It doesn't appear like it's super dark when you first put this paint layer on, but it'll appear much darker as it dries by the time it finishes. It's generally a good idea to paint more than one tile at the same time because you really do not want to let yourself start on the next stage of the paint job while it's wet at all. As you can see, I've painted about 20 with the raw umber to get it up to this stage. So since we're doing sandstone, we're going to want some orange, red, and yellow tones in it. We're doing raw sienna next. We're going to use the same paintbrush. This time we want coverage on top of the surfaces, but not really in the cracks. We're not looking for deep coverage, but we are looking for the paint to cover over most of the surface, as this is going to be really the base color that sits underneath everything else we're going to do. So I wipe a little bit of it off as I do it. I don't want it to be too wet because I don't want it to go deep into the cracks. You can see I'm leaving some of the dark there, but still getting most of it. You want to leave room for the next color to come in and still have some area that you can see this color through it. take a final pass, getting this color richer on all the higher surfaces. Let that dry, and we'll move on to the next color. So that layer dried a lot faster. You'll notice that as you do this, each layer will dry faster than the previous one. That's because we're using less and less paint each time. By the time we do the last 2 layers, you can start them pretty much right after you finish the first one. That being said, still a good idea to paint a lot of tiles at the same time, because it ensures that everything is really dry before each layer, which is pretty important to get a good effect. So our next color, we're going to do burnt sienna. This is a much redder brown. We're not going to place this over the entire tile. We're going to be spreading this in blotches on it. So once again, we're trying to recreate sandstone. Sandstone, especially when you see sandstone walls, there's a tendency for the colors to be different in different places. So I'm going to get the brush plenty wet, but then I'm going to take some of it off, and then I'm going to start just hitting some faces here, but not all of them. And you know, this is a part of this where you can be pretty creative. It's nice to get the same tiles on the front and back, but it's really not that critical. Most people are not going to notice where you've got that, and you want to get a pretty good solid red in those areas. It's okay if it bleeds over a little bit. It can be nice to add a little bit, you know, coming across some of the other tiles. Or you don't need to, but it still can add depth to the whole thing. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now we're going to highlight over the areas, especially where we don't have red, with honey brown. So with this, we're going to take a much lighter touch. We're trying to really get the raised surfaces. We're not to the point that we're doing something like a dry brush yet, but we still want to get the brush wet and take off a good chunk of the paint. And then we're going to look for areas where we want to highlight the brown. We're going to hit this pretty much with the side of the brush. Now, you're inevitably going to go over some of the areas that you hit with the red. That's fine. The idea here being is that you're looking to just create a mottled texture on the tile, and then we're gonna build on that. It's almost like camouflage, but desert colors. For our final color, we're going to do one more dry brush. This time we're focusing on the edges. We're going to bring a little yellow to the party. So this is one called Desert Sand. Same thing on the dry brushing. Once again, don't use a brush that you like. So now we're doing a similar thing, except for this time we're focusing more on the edges. We want to bring those out. If you've seen a lot of sandstone, you'll find that it tends to get fairly white on the edges. This is what we're trying to simulate, but we're also using the yellow to bring out a little bit more of that kind of mottled color that can be in sandstone. Don't want to overdo this. And there we go. We're good.